Welcome to the second session as we switch over from the startup, from the future of manufacturing to the current status on decoding industrial AI. I'd like to welcome you. Now, Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, just testified at the Congress, stating that the AI is still under hype. Now, this session is about decoding industrial AI, and we have a couple of perspectives from the vendor's perspective as well as an end user perspective. So I'd like to welcome the moderator for the session with an analyst background, Hamish McKenzie. Welcome to the stage.
Great. Thank you very much, Lucian. So whether you're just starting your day or just finishing it or somewhere in between, welcome to the session. My name is Hamish McKenzie, and thanks for joining us at this session, which is as Lucian mentioned, Decoding Industrial AI, what manufacturers need and what they don't, sponsored today by Arch Systems. So first off, it would be great if you could just tell us who you are, where you are in the chat. Nice to get a feel for who's joining us. And while you do that, get settled in. A couple of points of housekeeping. As I'm sure you all know, it's an hour-long session, and I'm going to be introducing the topic and the speakers. And we're going to begin to great discussions, get some great insight from our speakers, but we also want to try and leave time for the most important people in the room, you, our audience, to ask some questions. So all the way through the session, please get your questions in the Q&A function in the tool. Don't put them in the chat, because if you put them in the chat, the likelihood is that they'll get lost, because the chat, you know what a chat is like, it goes on forever. So please use the Q&A tool, and don't wait until the end. As soon as you think of a question, get it in the tool, and we'll get to as many as we can by the end of the session. All right. So as Lucian mentioned, AI is everywhere at the moment, but not everything labeled AI is the same, and not all of it is delivering value yet. And so what we want to do in this session is to really try and cut through some of the noise and help manufacturers decode what's actually worth investing in from an AI perspective. So obviously we've got all the buzzwords, copilots, agents, but what we want to talk about is real world use cases which are delivering and driving measurable outcomes. And we're going to explore what today's factories really need from AI. And what we hope is that you're going to be able to leave the session with a lot more clarity on what your priorities should be, some of the red flags to avoid, but also some actionable insight that can really help you start driving smarter decisions and not getting lost in all the hype, even if Eric Schmidt says that the hype is still not enough compared to the potential of the technology. So let's introduce our very special guests now. First up, we have Andrew Scheuermann, who is CEO of our sponsor today, Arch Systems. He's also the co-founder, and Arch Systems helps global manufacturers extract value from machine and factory data. And we're all about the value here at IIoT World, as you all know. He's got a PhD in materials science from Stanford, and he's published over 20 papers on semiconductors, electronics manufacturing, and renewable energy. He's also developed world record silicon photoanodes and worked with major semiconductor equipment vendors. He co-built StartX, a leading startup accelerator with over $200 million invested. So he's a very busy man. And if that weren't enough, he also is a very active advisor to entrepreneurs himself as well. So delighted to have you with us, Andrew.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you. Next, we have May Yap, who is SVP and CIO at Jabil. May oversees IT across 100 sites, more than 100 in fact, in more than 25 countries. So as you can probably imagine, she's a very busy lady. She leads Jabil's digital transformation and digital factory initiatives, and she brings extensive IT leadership in IT strategy, operations, and cross-functional integration. She's been recognized on Forbes CIO Next list and named CIO of the Year by IDC Asia Pacific, and I can testify to how valuable that is as an ex-IDC employee myself. She's also been honored for advancing women leaders through the AmCham Singapore's Hero Awards. Fantastic for joining us. Thank you very much for being here, May.
Thank you.
And next up, we have Douglas Bellin, who's business development executive at AWS. He is the global smart factory and industry 4.0 lead at Amazon Web Services. He drives strategy and implementation for manufacturing and supply chain solutions, bridging those worlds that we all know so well, OT and IT. He formerly led his industrial market strategy at Cisco and has got deep expertise in RFID and analytics. And he also helped expand a BI software company into Asia. He's also spent 12 years in Asia Pacific over the course of his career, but he's currently based in Seattle. Thank you very much for joining us, Douglas.
Good morning, everybody. Looking forward to the day.
Fantastic. Thank you. And just very finally, the least important person in the room, a few words about me. I'm your moderator, Hamish Mackenzie. I am a former IDC analyst, but I've been running my consulting business from here in Munich, Germany since 2006. And I help industrial technology vendors increase their growth efficiency by working with them on various aspects of their go-to-market strategy, from sales, marketing, HR, the whole shebang, really. And of course, ever more busying myself with integrating AI into all of those services that I offer. If you'd like to know more about me, look me up on LinkedIn. I'm the only Hamish Mackenzie in Munich, as far as I know, so you should be able to find me pretty easily. With that, quick reminder, get your questions into the Q&A function, not the chat. That will really help us out. And with that said, let's get into it. So I like to start these sessions by just giving a bit of context, really. And so I wanted to start with you, Andrew, just to talk a little bit about some of the use cases of generative AI versus machine learning, how they're creating value, and how they're being adopted into factory operations so far, as far as you've seen.
Well, I liked your, Eric Schmidt quote that, things are potentially still underhyped. I think it feels like it's a bit of both, underhyped and overhyped, right? Mm-hmm. And it was like in the .com boom, the hype is like everybody's slapping .com on for no reason. And I think some of that with generative AI is, we all know, or almost everybody knows at this point, that it can be a chat bot like ChatGPT. And almost everybody is just slapping a chat bot on their website. I think that's a good example of, if everybody does that and think it blows up the value, that's hype, because ChatGPT can already read your website and tell you what's on there. So you haven't necessarily added anything by just putting a chat bot on your website. But so let's step back, though, because I think there are really amazing use cases happening, and we are just at the beginning. People don't realize the real use cases, how big they can be. So machine learning, machine learning is not generative AI. Machine learning is the use of statistical algorithms where you're involved in the training process, supervised training, unsupervised training. And a classic example in manufacturing is predictive maintenance. We're going to take a bunch of streaming sensor data and we're going to train a model, maybe for that industry, that exact machine, and we're going to predict that it's going to fail instead of just do condition monitoring. Really powerful. Not generative AI, been going on for a while, still has so much room to improve in machine learning areas like that. There's a lot of exciting areas in predictive quality done with machine learning. So those are really exciting. And some people are hyping those more as AI because everyone's talking about AI. They've existed, they continue to exist. So generative AI is using pre-trained models like those from OpenAI, those from Anthropic. We take a lot of use of, Doug here with AWS. AWS has Bedrock. And so there's all kinds of these great generative AI products, pre-trained models. And among other things, they're incredible at reading language and making decisions. And that's where agentic AI comes in, where you use generative AI to actually allow it to make a decision. So directly to your question, what do I see as use cases? So the first one that everybody's doing, but it's not so novel, is just chatbot to describe what's on the internet. ChatGPT already does that. The thing beyond that, which is novel, the very first thing a lot of manufacturers are doing is a chatbot on top of private data, on top of documents. So they'll structure, for example, machine manuals or SOPs and just make it easier to find things. It's almost like a search use case, but with generative AI, reading things. And then you go deeper than that, and you start having generative AI being able to read what was previously considered unstructured information, like PDFs, like images and other things, all together to make a decision. One example here is root cause analysis. That's extremely powerful. So in the factory today, if you have a downtime, if you have a quality issue, people are running around, they're looking at machines, they're reading reports, they're spending a lot of human time to read data. And generative AI can read that in a moment and find the root cause. It can find the needle in the haystack, sort of things. And then I think the last set of use cases that are really starting to emerge is being able to still make decisions in uncertainty. So, traditional automation in the factory is different from agentic automation because of its tolerance for uncertainty. So, for example, if you're actually going to try to automate changing your schedule in the factory without generative AI, you've got to have a precise signal, a precise API, or you're not going to make a change. So you would instead tell a human, hey, we don't know exactly how long the machine's going to be down or this or that, but like You decide if we should still change the schedule. And these are emerging use cases where generative AI can make human-like decisions with uncertainty, where it is still a good idea to make a decision versus no decision and analyze the information. So that's what I would say. I'd say, it's using pre-trained models that can think like a human. Based on use cases are reading private data instead of just public, which already exists. Going beyond that is root cause analysis in real time, like only humans could do before. And going beyond that is making live decisions in the factory, even in chains, despite uncertainty in your data.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. Okay, and I wanted to come to Doug now, just to get a little bit more into in the weeds and have an internal perspective. So Doug, could you talk a little bit to how these use cases are discussed and ultimately built internally?
Yeah, I think Hamish, a great question, because I think that's what everybody's asking is, how do we start, or where do we start? And I think Andrew kind of outlined it a little bit with what are those easy things to do? Like you said, chatbot. Make it an internal chatbot. Where's your important information sitting? You have tons of different documentation, probably in a file cabinet somewhere that has all of your different manuals and things like that. And somebody gets an error message. What do they do right now? They run to the file cabinet to try and figure out how to fix it or what to do from that standpoint. It's very manual. So, the first use case to me is exactly what Andrew said. Get that data in, scan it, put it into a knowledge graph or into a repository of something that then can read it, make it easy for the users to type in or use their voice and ask a question. And suddenly they'll go from having to go to that remote location, or if they can find it, or a SharePoint or something else where that PDF file sits, they can ask that question, get that information quickly to them, and then start to understand what they need to do with it. Then you start to build more and more different use cases where the chatbot is great, but it's giving you information. Now what you want to do is, what is the guided action that that user should be taking? So now that guided action is great. Now that I know what the error is, what should I do to fix that machine? Maybe it is looking up stock parts or looking up capabilities from there. And a lot of times these start as that next step of, great, I'm going to keep the human in the loop. But as Andrew said, very quickly get the human out of the loop. Now that sounds kind of weird to happen, but ultimately it does. So take that example right there. Instead of passing an error message to the user, why not just pass to them actually the description of what they need to do to fix that machine? They don't really care about the error message, right? Most people, you stand in front of a machine, you get an error message. It's a hexadecimal code, which makes zero sense to at least me. I mean, normal human beings have no clue what a hexadecimal code means. But now if somebody said to me, hey, Doug, here's the video of exactly how to fix that machine due to what you've done the last 8 times when this error message occurs, I can drive to action very quickly. And I don't need that person in the loop going, yep, we're good with that, once we trust that the answer is the right thing from that standpoint. So there's always that first build it and then start iterating very quickly to be able to drive and have those cases going forward. And to me right now, these are incredibly easy to do. This is not years and years of data. Start with one machine, start with one data set, get it fine-tuned, understand the workflows, and then you can start to very quickly update the files, do what Andrew said about, hey, now I want to just skip these type of things. Forget the error message. If you already have ML in place, that's your starting point. The ML message doing predictive maintenance can now say that whole workflow as we start to move forward. And we'll talk more about workflows, and I'm sure we're going to get into agentic AI, because that's this year's buzzword versus last year's buzzword was Gen AI. So there's going to be a lot we're going to have to talk about here.
Yeah. All right, fantastic. And thank you for bringing that word easy into the discussion, because I think in a lot of companies there is a bit of rabbit in the headlights syndrome, and it just seems so potentially great, but also scary and big, and where on earth do we start? And the point is that you can actually introduce some fairly quick and easy solutions to really start gaining momentum. Obviously it's important to have a strategic approach as well over the long term, but it's really easier than a lot of people think to get those first early wins. All right.
Sorry,
Doug. Yeah.
It's easy, but I would say you also need to put the right architectural construct in place to allow you to get to these scaling standpoints. And that's working with that right architecture to ensure that it's not just a chatbot, but it is going to allow you to do those capabilities and include potentially, as Andrew said, multiple different types of LLMs in the back end, or SLMs, or all the other things that we're going to need in those areas as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, so let's look at some success factors now. And I think, and I want to come to May on this, but before I do that, Paul, could you just bring up the first poll question? We have a couple of poll questions here. So we'd like to ask you, the audience, what in your experience are, what determines the success or failure of initiatives like this? So if you could just answer that in the next few seconds, and then we're going to bring up the results. And I know that May has some points she'd like to talk about on this. So just give you another 10 seconds or so to do that. All right, Paul, could you bring up the results that we have from that? So it looks like the big winner is organizational readiness and workforce engagement. I don't know if that surprises you, May, or is that also does that fit with your opinion?
Right. So thanks for the poll. So I did it because I also wanted to find out from the audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of these obstacles that we feed, right? And it is very important for me to share some of my experience and what we really see as part of the critical success factors is no different from what you guys are actually putting out there. Organization readiness, how do the people actually engage, right? So in my simple mind, I actually like to categorize it into people, process, system, right? So you can actually kind of rightfully see what's going on in each of the sectors. So when we talk about people, and one of the common thing that Andrew and I always have this discussion about, right, is, hey, who is going to run this IIoT project? Who is actually going to lead this IIoT initiative? And our common conclusion is, hey, we need a cross-functional alignment to do it, right? In its IT, in its OT, in its the ET, the engineering team, in its the business unit, in its everybody who is actually in the whole manufacturing ecosystem to make it successful. But who eventually leads it, it doesn't matter, right? As long as somebody who is passionate enough, either from the IT side or the OT side, who wanted to do it. But what's important here is that we do need executive sponsor. The sponsor needs to come from the CIO team, the COO team, and definitely the CEO needs to be behind it to say that, hey, we want to do it and why, and we have a very clear reason why we want to do it. So that take care of the people side that I wanted to talk about. And then in terms of the process side, one of the things, like everything else, right? One of the things that we wanted to do when we want to initiate any initiative is that do we have very, very clear idea as to what business problem are we trying to solve? Mm-hmm. Right. So when we actually integrate a bunch of IoT, where we actually get a lot of data from all the IoT that's actually coming back to us, do we know what business problem are we trying to solve? What matrix are we going to look at? How does the matrix actually help us to solve the problem? And when we solve the problem, how does it actually help us? Is it going to improve our OEE? What kind of clear ROI are we going to get? Is it OLE or first pass? So we need to be super clear, right? When we actually say that, hey, I'm not just going to launch this IoT initiative because I need the IoT data. I need to be very clear when I launched all these IoT projects, what data am I looking for and why and who and how are we going to use this data? So that's the part about the process. And then nothing surprising. So we do need a very clear technology, a scalable architecture, like what Doug is saying, right? So I think that's non-negotiable. So should it be on edge? Should it be on the cloud? I think that's up to the individual or the company to decide, right? So at Jabil, what we have done is we emphasize that the modular IIoT building blocks and edge analytics are super important, right? Because that's actually helping to reduce the redundancy. So besides the people, process, and technology, there's actually another aspects that I think is super important as the critical success factors. So I kind of joke that, hey, I'm fortunate to be in this session because I have two of my partners in crime right here, right? One from AWS, one from Arch. I think working in partnership to actually get this moving is super important. Nobody can actually get it successful by yourself, right? I think it's important that we work with good partner and actually work it out together.
Can I throw May a compliment just real quick? Because
Yeah, sure.
in the order in which you did that, May, I thought there was something big there. You talked about cross-functional leadership being key. Support together, doesn't matter who leaders it. And then you talked about like the key metric before you talked about scalability.
Yeah.
And I think like too often in these talks, you'll have the CIO leader talk about scalability and then use case, and the OT person talk about use case and then scalability. You as a CIO took it the other way around. I think that's always true of you. And that creates that cross-functional leadership you said, where like, you know, each leader is like cares about the almost the other piece first, and then they're bringing their side. I just wanted to praise that.
Thank you.
That's always been true of you. You're like, what's the use case here? Let's be laser focused.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why Andrew and I keep having that discussion, right?
Fantastic. All right. So and I want to come on a little bit later to talk about solutions. Before we do that, I want to talk about some of the challenges. So we mentioned the L word there, the leadership. And Paul, could you bring up the second poll question, please? So we want to ask you, the audience, what is the biggest leadership challenge in scaling AI adoption across your manufacturing operations? So, and this is not the only thing we want to talk about. We want to talk about some other red flags and warning signs that AI is perhaps not going to deliver value. But maybe because we were just discussing the leadership aspect, we can just focus on that a little bit first. All right, Paul, could you show us the results of that? All right, so equally split, but oh no, it's just changed again. So business and operational goal alignment looks to be the clear winner on this poll. May, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it can't actually align with what I was expecting, right? Mm-hmm. So I think if we can't just actually dissect and double click on all these results, so we see half of the population that actually did the poll saying that ensuring cross-functional ownerships and accountability, and that can't resonate exactly as to what Andrew and I were talking about, right? So we do need cross-functional team to actually, irregardless is it an IIoT project or AI project or any transformation projects, we do need the people that's the stakeholders to actually own it and actually have the accountability in it. So that doesn't surprise me at all, right? And then leadership and buy-in, and then aligning the AI strategy, the business and operation goals. So I think bingo, right? So back to that, besides the poll results, so what are some of the early signs that we are seeing, or what are those kind of red flags or challenges, right? So, many a time, I think we talk about that in my first question, right? In my first answer, we do need people in the stakeholders to actually be part of it, know how to do it, and trust us to do it, right? So it doesn't matter is the IT or OT. So I think having a clear owner to actually own it, but having everybody supporting it, I think that's super important, right? So, and if I actually can't double click on it, right, besides IoT, I think what we are also concerned on is AI solution, industrial AI solution. So anytime when we touch on AI solutioning, the fundamental foundation of it is that do we have the data to help us to do what we need to do to analyze the data, be it going on machine learning or Gen AI or whatnot, right? Or even creating the chatbot. So where is the data? So having the right data source, knowing how to, dissect the data, looking at the data, cleansing the data, because, one thing that we all know that poor data quality, garbage in, garbage out, right? So we actually depend on data a lot to make sure that the data needs to be there. The data is actually not siloed, right? And we have a clear definition on the data source. We have a governed data platform to actually look at our data and own the data. So that's the second part of, the usual challenges that we are facing, right? So I wanted to come back a little bit on the joint ownership of doing AI solution. So one thing that I find quite useful right, that we have done in Jabil when we actually embark on the AI initiative is that we do set up actually what we call a data and AI council. So this is actually from hard lesson learned, right? So many times when people talk about, initially when we talk about AI or talk about data, everybody is like, pointing the finger back to IT and say, hey, IT, where's all this data? Why is my data not cleansed? Why is this all the garbage in the data? But many times everybody know that IT doesn't own this data. IT is probably the custodian of the data. And we talk about data, when we wanted to implement AI solution, we need to make sure that this part of that equation is right. So that actually drives me to create this, AI and data council, where I want it to be a joint ownership of, when we talk about AI solution, we need to actually have it with such that everybody needs to be part of that whole initiative, right? I call it the big T, the transformation. So the data and AI council, I actually invited for every function, including BU, operation, IT, the finance and the HR. That is one senior representative that sits in this data and AI council collectively, right? Not the word collectively. Collectively, we need to actually make the decision as to where we want to put the investment on what are the right AI project that makes sense for Jabil. Right. So we collectively make that decision, and we collectively actually come up with a data and AI policy that's applicable for Jabil. Right. We all know that everybody is super hyped on AI, and everybody is super eager to actually go out to try something. But we need to be super careful. Right. I do not want my Jabil data to be out there in the World Wide Web. Actually, everybody can look at it. So that is guardrails that we actually put in, that although we allow innovation, but we need to actually have the guardrail to actually help people understand it. So that's some of the things that we are doing to actually kind of overcome the challenges in AI.
Okay, fantastic. Doug, Andrew, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think May hits it on the head with security. When this whole buzzword started, not quite 2 years ago. Was it 2 years ago? I can't. It felt like last week, but I think it was a little over 2 years ago. Everybody rushed to get these things going out there, and suddenly it was like, wait a minute. I can see everybody's data. There's some trade secrets on there, and how do I get rid of that? And now that people have copied it or downloaded it, you're kind of in trouble all of a sudden. So while you want to rush at it to be able to use these capabilities, again, it goes back to what's the thought process, what's the capability, who is going to be looking at that bigger story to make sure that we have the right things moving forward. And again, looking at the right architectures, looking at the right capabilities is going to allow you to do that type of capability. For us at Amazon, security is always job one. In fact, it's probably job zero. It's before job one that we have to have from that standpoint, because those are your crown jewels. That is your intellectual property. That's your differentiator from those standpoints. And I think that was an important thing that we were very cognizant of from the start, and wanted to make sure that our customers were able to use that very quickly as well.
Okay, fantastic. And Andrew, I know you've got some thoughts on this as well. How are manufacturers thinking about data security and data ownership in the context of AI? In your experience?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I was going to comment on security exactly as well, because on one hand, people rush by it like, oh, it's something we got to quickly get the approval and do well. It has never been more important to have the security and ownership of the data, right? As Tug was saying, as May was saying, because of how powerful generative AI is, if your data is in the wrong place, wrong vendor, it is so easy to learn things from it. In the past, sometimes you were almost protected by how big the data was. No one could take the time to look through it. Now you can put a generative AI on it and just find exactly, hey, can you look anywhere in this data? Did anyone talk about this specific confidential detail with this name? And boom, it's found immediately, right? Yeah. And so it's never been more important to actually protect this data and think about the vendors that you give it with, the infrastructure that you put together. And some people are getting frozen by that. And I think it's important that everybody looks inside and asks, is this really my blocker, or do I not know my use case and how to do it? And so I'm waving the security flag to kind of protect the fact that I don't know my use case. Like, everyone should make sure they're not doing that, right? They're like attacking their use cases with ferocity, and then therefore they can define the right security architecture against it. But the basic principles are really clear, right? You need to be able to harvest the data from inside of the factory. Some of the stuff about security that's been true is, it was true in machine learning, it's true in generative AI, where you need to think about in your factory, your industrial protocols. There's a lot of insecure protocols in the factory where you can just delete a machine's recipe, stop a line, and so you need an on-premise secure system that can't be accessed from the outside. It's isolated. And then you need to be able to get encrypted secure copies of data up into private cloud environments. Almost nobody has big GPU clusters to run these AI models like in their factories, and it doesn't really make sense to do that in the future. So the people that think they're going to be on-prem forever, that makes no sense, right? But you've got to have the ability to harvest data, with accuracy and securely from the premise, from the factory itself. Up in the cloud, you need to really understand the governance model that May said. You need to leverage the cloud. Everybody needs to be leveraging the cloud. It is like way past the question. And I think generative AI has finally moved us beyond that. Like a few years back, people are still, I don't know, should I be in the cloud? Should I not? At least for me, I almost never hear people doubt that anymore. They're like, I have to be in the cloud with my data. It's just got to be private, secure, with good governance, and working with vendors that I trust, so that I actually had time to review their terms and conditions deeply, and I know who they are. and that's really the key. And I think that's causing manufacturers to want to pick a smaller number of trusted partners. And so that makes it even more important that the partners you pick have open models and are collaborative, because you both need to limit how many partners you can work with, so you deeply understand their private cloud architectures, but you need to make as much use of the data as possible. So these are the different constraints that people are optimizing, and not to just put in a plug for AWS, but obviously Doug here, there are fantastic structures to kind of defeat all those trade-offs, even in really challenging situations, like say in with government data, with like the new government clouds offerings and those sorts of things. There are abilities to use secure clouds, use AI models, have people manage these things remotely, and achieve all that. You just have to be consistent, put in the work, identify the right technologies, and set them up.
Fantastic. All right. So I want to move on now, because we're already more than halfway through the session. It's amazing how fast these things always go. We've talked about some challenges. Let's move on to some solutions now, and let's get real, as I like to say. So May, could you provide us with some examples of some real world use cases where you've actually seen industrial AI driving measurable value in manufacturing?
Yeah, definitely. So let me continue from my conversation on, the collective team in Jabil, right? The Data and AI Council. We actually collectively decided that, hey, for a manufacturer, right? So there are really three pillars of AI, industrial AI solutions that we wanted to invest in, right? There are many, many things that we can do, but it's really that three pillars that we should actually be focused on. So number one is really talking about vision solutions, right? Computer vision solution. How do I actually use AI to actually improve my inspection process or augment the people that's actually doing the inspection, right? So that's one pillar of it. And I'll come back to talk a little bit about that, right? And then the second pillar is really to what Andrew was saying, machine learning, right? So you can't run away with data. We have tons of data in manufacturing, right? From the shop floor, from the machine, from all the IoT devices that are giving us that machine, those data. So how do I actually apply machine learning algorithm to actually let the data speak and let the data act? I really like this terminology because it actually tells a lot, right? So with this data, it's not bits and bytes, it is really insights, right? So when this data can actually be converted to something that is speaking to you, right, then it can actually trigger actions, right? So that's really the second buckets that we're talking about, machine learning initiative. And then the third bucket of investment that we are looking at is really generative AI that actually evolved into agentic AI right now, right? So we know for very sure that, hey, again, Jabil, we have 100 over locations, 100 over manufacturing sites out from 25 countries, 140,000 employees. I talk about, close to 1 million of the parts that is actually moving in and out of the factory right now. So imagine the kind of data set that we have, right? And that kind of insights that we have, that kind of, knowledge base that we have. And many of them are actually sitting as tacit knowledge right now. So how do I actually use generative AI and then evolve it into agentic AI to convert the tacit into the explicit knowledge, right? So those are the three buckets. So if I may, I'd just like to come back a little bit into the vision solutions, right? So we are early adopters of our own, vision solution, where we call it the smart eye solution, right? So the smart eye solution actually has smart camera, small devices, right? Edge devices with camera, with our own proprietary AI algorithms that we actually deploy to the shop floor, right? So they can actually help the operator, help, the technician to actually look at very simple defects, right? Identify the defects, count the screws that's in the shop floor, right? So, simple devices and simple gadgets like that with AI algorithm can actually really help enhance our first pass sale. They actually help to reduce a lot of our, poor quality and inspected out very, very early. So the later evolution of our smart eyes actually talks about, hey, how do I actually augment this smart eyes and put the AI algorithm behind the AOI solution, right, to actually make it even smarter. So that's another part of our smart solution, eye solution, right? We also have interesting use cases that we're working with customers, right, from the agricultural sector, right, that looks at, hey, using our solution, using our AI, using our proprietary AI algorithm. So we are actually helping the agricultural sector to actually set out the baseline as to, hey, is certain of the agricultural products, let's say cabbage or things like that, are they ready to be harvested, right? So we have actually extended the use case from just using it internally within our manufacturing shop floor to helping our customers. So that's some highlight about what we're doing on the visioning, right? And then I talk about machine learning. So it all come back to data, right? We come back to so much of the data that's being used. So again, I like to point to Andrew, because he and I has been debating on these questions a long time, right? So like what I say, Andrew is my partner in crime, right? So we have actually leveraged on Arch to actually connect all our SMT machines, right? So there are tons of data that's coming out from it, right? So what we need to do next is actually using this data, using the physics of, what's happening in the SMT. What we really wanted to create is to make sure that, hey, using the data, can it actually start to prompt us to go into a closed loop or, closed loop manufacturing system where when we look at the entire workflow, right? Before we actually move our PCB board from one machine to the next machine, is my machine actually telling me or giving me indication whether the current process is an inspect or spec, or are we able to actually stop the machine before we let the board flow through the oven and actually go down the line, right? So the thought process here is that, how do I actually create this closed loop system where it actually can identify the defect, fix it, or stop it from even happening, right? So it's a lot of predictive maintenance within what we are trying to do here. So that's another part of the machine learning that we're talking about. And then the next pillar, that's where Doug and his team actually comes in, right? So we are working with AWS to actually look at how we can actually use the tacit knowledge. I talk about tacit knowledge, right? And then Andrew and Doug was also talking about, the chatbot, right? So beyond the chatbot, we have a lot of information. We have a lot of lesson learned. We have FMEA, right? We have debugs. So how do I actually use the generative AI features and functions and actually really make sense of all this data point, right? So that's something that we are working on right now on Ask Me How, right? So for the operator or whoever that's actually in the shop floor, if I need to understand certain error code, right, on the nozzle, I actually need to just type it in and it will spit out and say, hey, this is the error code. What does it mean? This is the common way to actually resolve this problem. So this is where we're heading to right now.
Fantastic. So lots of detail there, lots of exciting use cases. There are, however, a couple of potential spanners in the works, which I want to move on to now with Andrew and Doug. First of which is the sheer speed with which the AI technology itself is maturing and how quickly it's improving. So Andrew, could you, and the second of which is user adoption. So how do you actually make sure that the users, the people in the factory are accepting the technology and enthusiastic about using it to enhance the value that they deliver to their organizations. So first, Andrew, could you talk a little bit about how to deal with that speed issue, the speed with which the technology is maturing?
Yeah, I mean, before there was kind of a linear playbook as like connect data, then make a KPI, then do an analytics, now do a
Not
machine
anymore.
analytics. Yeah, you have to reevaluate and figure out where you can start doing things at the same time because they drive better ROI and adoption. Maybe Doug will talk about that. So for example, have you adopted a basic KPI dashboard on downtime and OEE? That's still valuable, but you can pair that immediately with the generative AI that starts figuring out your downtime reasons. So if you're going back in time, you put your first KPI in place and it's all manual, and then you do an IoT connection, and now at least you know uptime, downtime, and then you start having user forms to fill out downtimes. Leapfrog that whole thing and go to a generative AI that figures out the OEE and downtimes for you because it can look at your data, right? Another example, May gave the example in electronics that you're often stopping at each station to evaluate, is the quality good enough before you can move on? So old technology, you put in like a stop system to make sure, and then you come over as a human and you inspect the article and then you say it's okay to move on. Move right to new technology where you do these virtual stops and the technology tests all the data and does a predictive quality and moves it on immediately. We've seen like 60, 80% OEE increases where manufacturers removed these physical stops and they're using the data to automatically analyze, maybe with machine learning, maybe with generative AI, both could be applicable here to figure out that quality is good. And so those are two specific examples. And I could make 10 more. So anyone wants to chat, we'll make the specific ones. But how do you bring in maybe Doug's example with reading the error code into a guided action? Again, in the past, you'd just connect data. Then you'd send the person an error code. Then you start trying to predict the error code. Well, how about you jump straight to a guided action? So the first time you connect the error code, it comes to the person with the page in the manual that they were needing and do exactly this. And then you build on the predictive. So the order of things should be rethought. And the good news is they can based on the business case, and you can bring in these advanced technologies immediately. They're advanced because they're newer, but they don't need to be advanced to you because they're all really accessible now. And to be honest, that's the thing that gets me the most excited about generative AI is how flexible and powerful it is. I think more than ever before, we can actually focus on the business case first, even with legacy machines. I'll make one more example and hand it over to Doug. Something extremely new is multimodal AI and the fact that some of these LLMs can even start using screens. In the factory, we just put out a paper where we go to a robotic machine, and instead of connecting it the IoT traditional way, we literally stream to the screen and we let the AI look at the UI and figure out, oh, I know what the machine's doing. That's like literally one of the newest technologies because these LLMs, and it's letting you use an even older machine that maybe doesn't have a good IoT connection the way a human would use it, like go up to the screen, look at it and use it. And so that's exactly an example where like you would have known that business case a long time ago to go up and look at the screen and figure something out on it. And now you can use the latest technology to actually attack a very early business case in your prioritization queue and create value right now.
Fantastic. All right. So that segues brilliantly now into what I wanted to talk to Doug about, which is because I'm very keen on making sure that we don't lose the human aspect in all of this, right? AI is as much about enhancing what everybody's capable of doing, right? Not replacing everybody. Hopefully not anyway. So Doug, can you talk a little bit about user acceptance and how organizations can really support and drive user adoption?
I think the users are one of those sometimes forgotten component of this whole thing, right? We talk people, process, and technology, but the people part is key because they will either use it or they will block it. People look at this and go, wait a minute, that's my tribal knowledge. That's why you have me here. And the reality is that's not really true. Yes, you have great tribal knowledge. Yes, there's reasons why you're here from that standpoint, but it's looking to the technology should be used to be able to help deliver those capabilities to help accelerate some of the change or some of the issues that you might be having out there. Another great use case that I was just working with a customer on this week was around stand-up reports. So think about the beginning of a shift. You know, what happens is you come in, you do a stand-up. This is the issues that we've seen. We're ahead of shift. We're behind a shift. We're, you know, what production issues are we having? What inventory problems are we having? All the fun things that come together. I see customers right now taking 2, 3, 4 hours to build that report. Well, guess what? All of that data sits somewhere. All of that data has that capability into it. So we actually started to build a shift report or a shift stand-up that when they come in, they literally click a button and it builds exactly where they're at. What's my, you know, exactly what Andrew was talking about. What's the OEE that we're at? What's the production plan that we're at? What's the timing of that? But even better, it even can fill in, these are the suggestions of what we should do for the next 3 hours to actually get to plan. Now, that is, yes, some of that knowledge that people have, but people are leaving. We don't have all these experienced people coming into here, and it takes a while to get that experience to be able to build that together. I think this knowledge management, knowledge capability, knowledge intelligence, which sounds weird. I'm not sure if that's a new phrase I just made up, but maybe it is. I'm going to have to trademark that pretty quickly. But I think that is something that people are looking at and saying, okay, great, I need this. You know, you look at right now, there's over 500,000 open roles in manufacturing which aren't being filled. And that's going to get worse as we start seeing more and more coming to the U.S. Just because we're opening up a factory does not mean we have the skill sets of people to work in there. So how do we augment the knowledge for those workers to make it better for them? And that's exactly what we've been talking about. Is it the error messages? Is it the new scheduling capability? Keep going from all those things from there. And I think the users will use that. They'll see the enablement of that. They're going to be able to move away from just, you know, standing in front of a machine to actually starting acting that next level of value. And that's where the user acceptance comes to play. Work with the users to help them understand this is not a job replacement. This is a job augmentation capability to help build scale and longer term issues. Yes, AI can do a lot. Can AI do everything? It can do a lot, but it's not going to be everything as we start to move forward. So yes, these are going to build more and more of those workflows and more of those capabilities. Another use case, just to bring that back, is we're doing a lot of things like filling in forms for users. This is not robotic process automation. This is robotic process automation using generative AI to make better forms being filled out for the users. Now, let's be honest, what's the value of a user going up to a keyboard and typing in an error message? Well, the error message is what tick off the whole thing anyway. So let's have the error message fill in the form. The user then validates, yes, that's correct, or no, that's wrong. And then they start to go into where that workflow is starting to help build that as they move forward. And again, a user probably doesn't have a lot of fun typing in on the keyboard. So let's take away some of those repetitive things that are just kind of non-value add and start to build more and more capabilities as we go forward.
Fantastic. All right. So we're starting to run a bit short of time, but I want to, before we go to questions, I want to keep to the schedule and have a quick look at the future. But I'm going to try and limit you to 1 minute each on this so that we have time for questions at the end, because we've got quite a lot coming in. So May, if I can just start with you, could you talk a little bit about the criteria that manufacturers should use to evaluate whether an AI solution is actually worth investing in the first place?
Sure. So I'll keep it short and sweet, right? So first of all, we need to ask the question of, you know, when you have an AI solution, what is it really trying to solve? So it all come back to what's the business impact, right? Does it support your revenue? Does it solve your cost issue? Does it solve your quality issue? So that's number one, the business impact. So number two is really the feasibility. Is the data actually available? And do we have the quality data? How does it actually work? So that's number two, the feasibility. Scalability. Andrew, I'm going to come into that, right? So I have 100 locations. I'm not just going to put in one AI solution for one plant, right? I'm really talking about, can the solution be scalable across my site or across my function? I think that's super important. And the next one is really time to value. How long does it take for me to deploy this solution, and how quickly can I see the benefit or the ROI coming back from the results of the solution? And last but not least, I cannot it will be sinful if I do not say that. The governance, do we have the right governance in place, right? So that we actually, when we deploy the model, when we deploy the AI solution, are we doing it in a responsible way?
Fantastic. So in case anybody didn't get, business impact, visibility, scalability, time to value, and governance. That's it in a nutshell. Those are the criteria you need to be looking at. Fantastic. Thank you, May. Andrew, let's talk a little bit about agentic AI. What's going to happen in there over the next 6 to 12 months, do you think?
Well, generative AI is like, it is already at this incredible level of thinking and capability. And so back to the very beginning of this, Eric Schmidt, it's underhyped. It is capable of making decisions and running many business processes. I'm a pretty smart guy. I often find this thing can make a strategy decision better than I can for a lot of things of art, right? It is that powerful. So I think that's where the underhyped is, and thinking about where you can actually orchestrate it into a decision-making process right now. And in every business, so, think about the dull, dirty, dangerous, and disappearing. Like, these are the things we want to automate with AI. So there's a bunch of dull and disappearing things. Doug talked about the lack of experts in the factory. So where I see agentic AI coming in the next 6 to 12 months, really seriously, is especially things like root cause analysis and guided actions, and then beginning to take some of their own guided actions as the step beyond that. So for example, filling a form, great, fill a form, but maybe before that form, let's say it was a quality audit report, I would have had to read through 10 different files, look at dashboards in the factory, boom, click the button, let the AI do that for you, make a decision. I've done the report, here it is filled out. The human doesn't have, I didn't do the analysis, so I'm not sure if it did it right or wrong, but I trust it because it's extremely good, and it probably actually did it better than the human would have. And now that's agentic, because you're letting it make a decision with some uncertainty, and you're not exactly sure if it did it right or wrong, but you're going to decide to start trusting it, right? So that's like filling forms with root cause analysis. And then in the example of the maintenance error codes we keep bringing up, bringing a guided action that's saying, here exactly what you need to do. What's coming next that people are saying is you run the AI again and you say, can you take any of your next actions? It turns out your very first next action was to request more of this material, or to request a spare part. Can you go ahead and take that action? Maybe your next action was to tell the scheduler, this line's going to be down for a long time, you should think about a reschedule. And that's where, as systems need to start talking with each other, I did a big post on some of these agent to agent ideas. I think that's probably 3 years away versus 6 to 12 months, but different companies in the space getting serious about how their systems can actually make decisions together. So one system can say, the line's down, I think it's going to be down about an hour. Do you want to reschedule? And the other system can think about that and make a decision. And those are some of these agentic workflows. So I think it's very real. I think people need to have aggressive and thoughtful strategies about where to put it in place. And this is one where you obviously crawl, walk, run, but it does start with acknowledging how powerful these pre-trained minds are, and the fact that it's actually foolish to not start putting them in place on many processes.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you very much, Andrew. And finally, Doug, and this is something that I'm really keen to hear your answer to, because this is something I struggle with. The sheer speed of new releases of LLMs and SLMs, how on earth do we stay on top of it? Can we even stay on top of it?
It's going to get worse. That's the problem. It's going to get fast. I hate to say that, but let's scare everybody a little bit. I think the first thing is, if you haven't even done anything in here, don't think you're going to jump right into agentic. A lot of this does have a little bit of a workflow on top of it. So if you haven't done the chatbot, get a chatbot done. Like I said, that's pretty quick and easy for us to be able to get going from that standpoint. Get your data in order. As I can't remember who said it, but Gigo, garbage in, garbage out. It doesn't matter. Make sure the data is in order for you to be able to do these type of things. Don't worry about, okay, are we going to use 3.5 or 3.8 or 3.9 or 4.0? That's not really the issue. The issue is, do you have the right structure in place to support all those releases as you start to move forward? I think one of the cool things in our technology stack that AWS is doing with Bedrock and a few other things is that it allows you to test those. So one day I can test 3.5, and in a week I can test 3.6 and see if there's a big enough difference for me to actually make that change. Because remember, all these do have a cost, and sometimes you can have a cost ratio that, that answer that the generative AI was giving me was way too verbose for what my end user needs. So could I use a lower cost, maybe a 6-month-old one that's going to give me enough of an answer for the users so they know exactly what to do. So to me, again, future, where are we going? How are we keeping up? Start simple. Start with the chatbot, make that thing happen, and then start looking at, once that data is set in place, how do we start doing this from a business standpoint? Companies still have two things that they want to do: get the product out the door and lower their cost. Not much else. If this is not helping you get more products out the door and lowering your cost, again, what is the ROI? What is the overall benefit that we're trying to get? Those are the two things that you really need to start looking at. And these need to help you with those capabilities, and they do. Everybody says there's an incredible ROI in these things. So that is really, in my opinion, what we need to start doing.
All right, fantastic. So we have time just to get to a couple of questions maybe. And because this is, probably shouldn't do this because it's partly in my own interest, but there's a couple of questions coming about how small manufacturing businesses can deal with this stuff. So, if you're a small manufacturing business, you're not going to be able to run your own internal LLM, right? Probably, at least not yet. And you probably don't have the volume and quality of data that a much larger organization might have. So how can these smaller organizations get started quickly and effectively?
Well, I would say if you're a big business, you're not going to run your own LLMs in-house anyway.
That's what I'm about to say.
I think Andrew said it. You're not going to have a fleet of GPUs to do these things and do that training from that standpoint. I think there's an advantage that a small business has, which is you're going to have a smaller data set of data that you need to fix. So it's going to be easier for you to get started. And just ask for help from your providers, Andrew with Arch and myself with AWS or others, of how do we make this simple? This is at a point of not quite cut and paste or click the button to make it happen, but it's getting pretty close to those capabilities.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
I guess I was just going to say, I think the main difference is how many use cases you can tackle in parallel. May gave her computer vision, machine learning, Gen AI. They've got things going on, all of them, and are successfully thinking business case first on many things. Mm-hmm. So you've got to narrow your focus. But as Doug said, nobody's going to build their own LLM. And I gave the example before about how Gen AI can read a dashboard, even on an old machine where you don't have to pull data out of it. So there's a leapfrog moment for technology of being able to use this in more places. And it's really just about take a smaller set of initial use cases and get focused on them. For me, that's really the only difference I'm seeing. I'm seeing a huge advantage for small manufacturers to catch up. There's great use cases out of the giant data lake, but it's not a prerequisite to get started with Gen AI and make progress.
Yeah. So actually, that's about what I wanted to say, right? Just start with something, start with a use case, and you will actually evolve from there, right? So everybody has a use case. Everybody has a business problem that you want to solve. Start with that, right? And frame it out as a use case.
Fantastic. All right. We have run out of time, unfortunately, but audience members, if we didn't get to your question, we will get back to you on those questions after the event. So don't worry, you will get an answer to your question. It just remains for me to thank our panelists for all your great insights and knowledge. Thank you again to the sponsor for the session, Arch Systems. Without our sponsors, these events wouldn't be possible. So we're extremely grateful for that. And obviously our audience benefits a lot from all the great content and insights that you can share. Thank you also to our attendees, obviously. And it's now time to move on to the next session for today, which is Thriving Amid Uncertainty, Building Agility in the Manufacturing Industry, sponsored today by Critical Manufacturing. If you're staying with us for the rest of the day, I'll see you later. I'm doing another 2 sessions. If not, then enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks again for joining us. Thanks, everyone.